It's 6 p.m. on a Friday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's begin with the headlines. With strong signs of another North Korean provocation, the deployment of THAAD is being discussed again. Seoul will have to carefully weigh its options as the controversial U.S. missile defense system could negatively affect ties with Beijing. Two bills are up for votes today, one designed to increase global awareness of North Korea's dire human rights situation, another dedicated to reforming South Korea's corporate structure. Determined to achieve its 2% inflation target, Japan's central bank adopts a negative interest rate policy for the first time ever, adding that more drastic measures are valid options. The deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, known as THAAD, is again being discussed after the recent events in the north. If Seoul does implement the U.S. anti-ballistic missile defense system, it will risk facing strong opposition from China. Our Connie Kim starts us off.
South Korea has shown an unusually positive stance regarding the deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System on the Korean peninsula. Seoul's Defense Ministry spokesperson said Friday the deployment of the THAAD system by the U.S. Forces Korea will help South Korea's national security and defense, adding that Seoul is considering every measure to prepare against North Korean missile threats. Spokesperson Kim, however, dismissed the U.S. news report that claimed Seoul and Washington could announce results of a THAAD system deployment meeting next week. Fueling speculation, an official from the presidential office of Cheongwade called discussions over the THAAD system deployment inevitable, as China is ruling out additional sanctions on North Korea. An option the presidential office is reviewing is a terminal-based radar that has a range of less than 1,000 kilometers, which is much shorter than the forward-based radar that can monitor up to 2,000 kilometers. This means the terminal-based radar won't be able to reach Beijing, even if the THAAD system was to be deployed from Pyeongtaek, a potential site that's closest to China. Beijing's foreign ministry has expressed hope that Seoul will be prudent in its decision regarding the THAAD system deployment. China has long been against the idea, as mainland China could be subject to monitoring. Analysts say South Korea's change in stance is sending a strong message to Beijing, North Korea's close ally.
South Korea may be pressuring Beijing, which has been taking a passive stance on imposing heavy sanctions against North Korea following its nuclear test.
But if Seoul decides to implement the system, diplomatic relations with China could suffer. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
South Korean Foreign Minister Byungse and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry vowed to strengthen cooperation in dealing with North Korea after its recent nuclear test, including an adoption of the UN Security Council's new resolution. Kwon So-hwa has the details.
Determined to effectively punish North Korea for its fourth nuclear test, Seoul's Foreign Minister Byungse and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry agreed to increase cooperation, especially in regards to the UN Security Council's new resolution against the North. Yoon and Kerry also agreed to take measures against the possibility of further provocations, such as a long-range ballistic missile launch, which according to reports could come as early as within a week. The two held a phone conversation Friday, Korea time, their third since North Korea's nuke test earlier this month. Kerry briefed Yoon on his trip to China and meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Kerry said he told Chinese officials that the U.S. administration considers Pyongyang's nuclear issue a top priority, as it not only threatens international peace and security, but also U.S. national security interests and those of its allies. For that reason, the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Thursday unanimously passed legislation imposing broad sanctions on North Korea. The bill calls for sanctions on any individual who contributes to North Korea's nuclear program, human rights abuses, cyber attacks, and other crimes. It also targets Pyongyang's minerals and coal exports, believed to be a key source of hard currency for the regime. The bill follows a similar but less extensive one passed by the House of Representatives a week after the North's nuclear test. The new bill is likely to raise concerns in China, as it could severely affect Chinese banks and companies that do business with North Korea. China remains a major stumbling block to a new UN Security Council resolution against Pyongyang. Despite holding an emergency meeting on the matter more than 3 weeks ago, the Council is still deliberating on how strongly to punish the North. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Let's move on to domestic politics now. The National Assembly's plenary session is still not off to any start yet. There's been a lot of delays, and the delay comes as the general meeting of the members ahead of the session took longer than anticipated. We now connect live to our Shin Se-min at the National Assembly, who has been following the developments. Se-min, any progress so far?
Well, good evening, Daniel. It looks like it's going to be a long night for the lawmakers here at the National Assembly as the plenary session hasn't even begun. Just a little over an hour ago, the main opposition camp just went in for another meeting to coordinate before the plenary session, which of course had been delayed, postponed twice already. Now, the lawmakers are wrangling whether or not to put two of the bills to a full floor vote. Those two being one on North Korean human rights and another on corporate revitalization. Now, as you've said, the plenary session was originally scheduled to take place at around 2 p.m. this afternoon, which got postponed to 4:30. And as of now, no word on when it will take place, with many here worried that the session might even get scrapped altogether. Now, the delay, as you've mentioned, came as rival lawmakers found themselves at odds over finalizing the wordings and phrasings in the bills for a vote. Also, the main opposition camp, the Minju Party of Korea, demanded that they handle the issue of redrawing the country's electoral map, one of the major contentious bills still stuck in Parliament.
So, Se-min, tell us a little bit more about the two bills on the table this evening. They're not entirely linked, but they're very important bills, and a lot of people have their eyes on them.
That's right. If passed, the government will be able to boost international awareness of North Korea's grave human rights violations and guarantee humanitarian aid from South if it's not being used for other purposes. And the revitalization bill, also known as the one-shot bill, is aimed at simplifying legal procedures and giving tax benefits to businesses voluntarily sold or purchased. It also includes mergers and acquisitions for firms in crisis due to oversupply and helps support companies that want to overhaul their management structure, aiming to improve efficiency. Well, that's all I have for now, but I'll bring you more coverage in our later newscast. Reporting live from the National Assembly, this is Shin Se-min.
All right, thank you for that, Se-min. Staying at the political arena, rival parties on Friday tried to find solutions to resolve the deadlock over the controversial law on parliamentary operations, but again, failed to make any progress, merely reinforcing their differences. Kim Young-gil tells us more.
The ruling Saenuri Party once again called on the main opposition Minju Party to pass the amended National Assembly law before the 19th parliamentary session ends.
We need to revise the current assembly law to stop the legislative paralysis. Passage of bills was 40% for the 19th assembly, 45% for the 18th, and 50% for the 17th assembly. Therefore, for the 20th assembly, we need this revised law.
Claiming that strict procedural rules are hampering progress, the ruling party continues to demand the expansion of the Speaker's right to table important bills. But Speaker Chung Yu-ah called the ruling party's proposal undemocratic, as it eliminates the provision for bipartisan consent. The Minju Party's interim leader pointed out that the current parliamentary deadlock was due to negotiations yielding poor results, and not because of the assembly law.
The reason why the ruling party is in such a hurry to pass the revised assembly law is because rival parties are unable to reach a compromise at the negotiating table. Merely granting the Speaker more authority to endorse bills goes against the purpose of this law.
Chung is opposed to easing requirements allowing the Speaker to call a vote, and has instead proposed an arbitration plan to shorten the deliberation of bills from 330 to 75 days. Rival parties plan to take a closer look at Chung's proposed law and seek alternative measures. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Turning now to a case from the 20th century that recaptured the attention of Korea. The Seoul Central District Court on Friday found U.S. citizen Patterson guilty of murdering 22-year-old Korean college student Jo Jung-pil and sentenced him to 20 years behind bars. The verdict comes more than 18 years after charges were first filed against a 36-year-old defendant for stabbing Jo multiple times at a Burger King in the crowded Seoul district of Itaewon. The court said statements made by Edward Lee, a key witness who was at the scene, were credible. Patterson fled Korea in 1999, but was extradited last year and was indicted for the murder charge. Shifting gears now, although Korea's industrial output rebounded last month, many analysts remain skeptical on whether this will actually lead to stronger recovery momentum this year, with lingering uncertainties abroad and business sentiment sitting low. For the numbers and more, we turn to our Hwang Ji-hye.
Output across all industries in Korea was up 1.2% in December, marking the first rise in 3 months. Statistics Korea says the rebound came on the back of strong performance in the construction sector, boosted by sales of apartment units and government investment in infrastructure. But the numbers also come from a low base effect. Industrial output was on a downward trend for 2 straight months in November as production in the mining, manufacturing, and construction sectors was battered by slumping exports. And prospects for this year look dim, with the many unknowns that threatened the economy last year still very much present.
The slowdown in China, especially the investments by the Chinese government, will drag down shipments of Korea's major export items like capital goods.
With the pace of growth losing steam in the world's second-largest economy on top of low global oil prices, sentiment on the corporate front is far from good. The Manufacturers Business Survey Index for this month fell 2 points from a month earlier to 65, according to the Bank of Korea, well under the benchmark 100, which means pessimists prevailed. The figure is the lowest since early 2009, when the country was struggling from the aftermath of the global financial crisis. And the feeble recovery momentum is stacking up pressure on the government to roll out more stimulus measures and on the central bank to cut key interest rates, especially as policymakers in major economies like Japan and Europe lean further towards loosening their monetary policies. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The Bank of Japan unexpectedly pushed interest into negative territory. That's a first rate adjustment since October 2010. The central bank announced Friday that it will introduce an interest rate of minus 0.1%. And according to our Kim Min-ji, the rate can go even lower if necessary.
Japan's central bank has decided to adopt a negative interest rate policy for the first time. In a tight 5-4 majority vote, the Bank of Japan said it will introduce an interest rate of minus 0.1% starting February 16th, but will impose it only on certain parts of reserves from financial institutions left with the BOJ. The move is aimed at pushing down borrowing costs to stimulate inflation.
In terms of interest rates, the Bank of Japan has decided to implement a negative rate of minus 0.1%. Going forward, if it becomes necessary, we would look at making that even lower if necessary.
The central bank said the Japanese economy was showing modest recovery, however noted concerns regarding plunging oil prices, as well as uncertainties in emerging markets, especially China. Japan has long suffered from deflationary pressures, pushing the central bank to take aggressive stimulus measures in recent years.
In terms of the largest risk, it would be having a depression starting in addition to China and the developing countries and their unknown developments. These sorts of unknown conditions mean that the financial situation around the world remains unstable.
In addition, the BOJ will maintain its quantitative easing program, expanding its monetary base at the rate of 80 trillion yen, or roughly $660 billion a year, through buying up Japanese government bonds and other assets. Investors responded positively to the news, with the benchmark Nikkei shooting up 2.8%. In other parts of Asia, the Shanghai Composite rose 2.9%, while Korea's benchmark Kospi rose 0.3%. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The World Health Organization has warned of an explosive spread of the Zika virus, expecting the mosquito-borne disease to affect between 3 and 4 million people in North and South Americas over the next 12 months. The WHO's Director General, Margaret Chan, called the virus a threat of epic proportions. Symptoms of the Zika virus itself are usually mild, but seems to pose a serious risk to pregnant women and their unborn babies. There is no vaccine or cure, and the virus has been linked to microcephaly, resulting in babies born with small heads. The WHO says it is setting up an emergency committee to tackle Zika, meeting for the first time on Monday. Meanwhile, the Korean government has officially designated the virus a state-managed infectious disease on Friday, meaning any confirmed or suspected cases of the disease should be reported to the health authority. South Korea's capital, Seoul, and the nation's southern resort island of Jeju have both made it to the ranks of world's top 100 destination cities. On Thursday, market researcher Euromonitor International unveiled its list of the world's leading cities in terms of international tourist arrivals in 2014. Seoul ranked 13th with nearly 9.4 million foreign visitors. That's up nearly 9% from the previous year. Jeju ranked 94th with almost 2 million visitors. CNN introduced the top 25 cities and said the rise in the number of tourists in Seoul may have been helped by Psy's Gangnam-style music video, which set records in YouTube hits. First on the list was Hong Kong with nearly 28 million international tourists in 2014, followed by London and Singapore. And that's a wrap for us. As always, thank you for watching.